Okay, so now that we've got the contact pose and the passing pose, you can start to see the walk kind of coming together. So we have contact, passing, then the mirrored contact, passing, then the mirrored contact, or then the original contact. So at this point, of course, we can extend this out to as long as we want to. 120 if we want to. I'm going to do it maybe not that long. I'm going to do more like let's just do 48 for right now. And that way we can see a couple of cycles. And you'll see that it stops right there now. I have all the controllers selected that are actually going to be animatable. Actually, if I can select it that way as well. Make sure I have keyframes on all these. And then I'm going to go into my graph editor. So right now, I usually have a tendency to use something like this. And then you can, if you want to do like a face cam or something over here, you can. But we can grab all of our curves, and we're going to go to View, Infinity, and then we're going to tell it what to do with infinity. So post-infinity, I'm going to cycle with an offset. I can actually do that pre-infinity as well if I'd like, and I usually do just so I can see what it looks like at the beginning and the end. And so now we'll be able to see this walk just happen off into space. Now if you're not really careful with making sure that your poses are pretty close to exact, if this goes off for like thousands and thousands of frames, sometimes there'll be a slight shift in the curve that's not sort of a standard progression. So stuff like 1 foot may get a little bit further ahead of the other. But so we just have to be careful with that. Okay, so I'm going to go in now and I'm just going to go ahead and start looking at some of my key poses. Okay, so I have those two. And now I'm going to go ahead and, so this is my contact. I need to now consider the weight that is absorbed onto this leg when the character steps down. So I'm just going to go halfway in between. And you'll see that I'm getting a little bit of free information here. So the first thing that we can steal is we can steal from frame 6 where that foot is going to be. Okay. And so now that foot comes down a little faster. It's still not quite fast enough for my money, but we'll work on that a little bit later. I'm going to turn off my grid. I hate seeing the grid. Okay, so if that foot, this is where the foot is going to absorb the weight, or this is where the body's going to absorb the weight. So we're going to think about what the hips do. If that foot's coming down, we have our leg kind of locked in our contact pose. Just for good measure, I'm just going to set a keyframe on everything. So we got our leg locked on our contact pose. What I usually have happen now is I have that leg just absorb the weight a little bit. The hips go down, and that way we get this feeling of the character sort of falling into that leg. Now, you can push the character forward a little bit if you want to. Considering the character's kind of just sort of launched itself forward. So the momentum is going to carry it over that leg. So even though it feels like it's a little out of balance right now, the momentum is moving forward. So you should be alright. So here's the other issue with the feet that I usually like to watch out for. So we're thinking in terms of force here. This front leg, at this point, this foot is pushing off the ground. The rear foot is pushing off the ground. This front foot is preparing to catch the weight. Okay, so now the weight is caught here, but you see what happens with this foot is it just kind of drifts up. Okay, and that doesn't feel like it's pushing off the ground. Okay, so we need to kind of add that push to it. And so usually what I do is I keep it back there a little bit, and I kind of just give it that feel like it's trying to push off the ground. So usually that involves me kind of rotating it a little further, just so I have a ground plane to look at. I'm going to go ahead and just create me one. Okay, just so I can see what I'm intersecting with. That's a little annoying. Let me make it a little darker, a little brighter so I can see it. Yeah, it's hyper shade. And I'm just gonna create a generic Lambert. Sorry. That gives me the option to brighten that up a little bit though. And then I want to uncheck the mesh so I don't select it. Okay, so now I can kind of see where my feet are contacting a little bit. And so what I want to happen is I want it to feel like this foot is just kind of pushing off the ground. And that's feeling a little better actually. But I still may just kind of give it that like it's pushing back and really trying to push off the ground. So if I get it to there, I may even tweak with that a little bit to make it feel like it's really pushing up to that last second. Okay, and so kind of slides a little bit. Maybe I'll actually keep it forward a little bit so that feels. Okay. Some people actually bring it up and do a little bit of a flip backwards. I don't need this in there if I do that. So it feels like it's kind of pushed off the ground. And that's not a bad option. I feel like it's probably a little too much of a flip backwards. But I may be able to do something like that. I really feel like it's pushed off. And so let's see how that feels. Feels like it's going through the ground, but we can adjust that in some in-betweens. I'm not crazy about it. I'm going to go ahead and zero that back out. Kind of keep it a little bit down and back a little bit again. So we'll see if it feels. There we go. So we're getting the foot interpenetrating a little bit, but that's just going to be something we fix and polish. Okay, so now you can kind of feel that it feels like the character is really maybe pushing a little bit more forward. And so that would help if we want to sort of lock the leg a little bit more. Something like that. Let's feel. There we go. Okay, so that's feeling good with that. Now let's talk about the arms. At this point, the arms are going to kind of overshoot this pose, and also we talked about it. If you think of the arms as sort of like the umbrella or the parachute, as the character drops down, let's make them drag up as if they're kind of doing a little bit of a drag because the character drops so much, you know. And so I usually do that. And what that's also going to give you is, since this is sort of the back pose, it's going to give you just a little bit of overshoot with the arm. Okay, and then we get the same thing with the front arm. Maybe move this forward a little bit more. Okay, of course, you'll want to do a little bit more with the hand. This may be the point that you decide to sort of put a little bit more openness into the hand. Okay, and so that feels a little bit more like this. There we go. Some people actually take this a little bit more in front of the body, like this as well, and so that's not bad. We can do something like this. The hand position is kind of slightly dependent on just general emotion, like is the character walking, you know, what's the casual hand pose the character's doing. Like, you know, some people's arms kind of roll inward a little bit more than others. I want to do a little bit of something like that, just to kind of give them an extension right there at the end. Okay, and then now since this character is starting to fall forward here, I'm also going to drag the chest back just a touch. I'm going to drag the head back just a touch. And so that makes it feel like he sort of falls forward and is sort of dragging in that fall. Does that make sense? Okay. And so because we did that, I'm actually going to make some slight changes to the passing pose. I'm going to go ahead and have that be when the head dips. Okay. So we get like a little bit of a head rocking forward. Something like that. Okay. Okay, so if we watch that now. Okay. Now, something you're probably already seeing is kind of this hesitation on frame 24 before he pops forward there. And we'll take care of that here once we get into polish, because that's something that's going to just be a little annoying to us. So usually what I would do is I would go do the other down pose, since I'm already in the mindset for down pose. For sake of this video, I won't do that. I'm just going to do the other up pose, and then I'll do the down pose off camera and come back and we will talk about what we have, since we have all the poses at that point. So let's talk about the up pose. So the up pose, the foot's going to start to rise a little bit. We can already see that happening here. So before we go to the feet, let's sort of talk about the sort of the wave motion of the hips. So if we look at the contact pose and the passing pose, the hips don't really change up and down very much. But on the down, it kind of dips a little bit. And in fact, I could probably dip mine even a little bit more. So we get a little bit of a down right there, right? And then it sort of starts to push back up. And that's happening because this leg is applying force to the ground, and this leg back here is sort of pushing the character over top of this leg. So think of this as sort of like a pole vaulter. This is the leg that the character is kind of being launched over. Right? You're pushing with this leg and sort of launching them over this leg. And so now that the character is kind of in balance here, they start to go off balance in this next pose. This is where they kind of throw themselves intentionally off balance to start their sort of fall forward into the contact pose. Okay, so this is going to be the highest pose up. This is going to be the pose where the character is sort of pushing themselves up in the air, sort of artificially high. And this, we usually do this pose a little higher than is really necessary because it just looks a little bit better. It makes it clear that this is the highest pose. And so now there's something that the foot does that's kind of interesting. I'll drag the toe back just a little bit. So if we look at the foot through these two poses, what it kind of does is it pushes off here, right? We may end up even changing that pose a little bit. And then it passes, and it kind of goes relatively high, but then the toe is usually kind of pointed somewhat down because of the push off here, right? So during the passing pose, you have to try to go from your toe pointing down to your toe pointing up here, okay? So there's sort of this little, like, penduluming at the knee almost, like you kind of flip your leg out. And so usually that ends up resulting in the toe kind of dragging a little bit, and the foot kind of dragging a little bit, and the toe kind of flipping out right there at the end. Okay, so that's the up pose, or at least that's the feet part for the up pose. So now we're going to look at what the arms are doing. So again, the arms are headed toward this pose here, sort of well, actually, really, they're headed toward this pose. They're headed toward their overshoot on the down pose. But we know that the arms are kind of rotating forward, right? And so what I usually like to do in most of my posing is I like to just sort of take in, at least in the arms, take into consideration the motion that the arms are traveling and sort of build some drag into that motion. Okay? And so it will just make it a little easier for you when you go to polish this later, that you will you'll already have some stuff happening in here when it comes to the sort of your arms feeling less robotic. Okay, so I'll do a little bit like that. Let's see what that feels like. Yeah, so you kind of feel that. It kind of feels like the upper arm gets there a little earlier, and then the elbows kind of flip out from that, flip forward. Okay, so let's look at our spine and our head. On frame 6, we kind of added a little bit of rotation forward, right? Which I don't know if I've really added that on this next one here. So that means, I really haven't set a keyframe on everything on this, have I? Go and set one. So that means if the head is down, and we're kind of going back up to our neutral here, what I may end up doing is in the spine, just adding just a touch of drag as the head comes back up. Okay, so that's going to do that sort of that opposite of what was happening when the character fell and it dragged the head back. Well, now the character is going back up, I'm dragging the head down just a little bit. And so we get sort of this built-in overlap in the head. Okay, and that's probably going to be too much. I'm probably going to have to go back and take some of that out. But for right now, that's alright. That'll work. Okay. And so that's the first set of cycle there. I'll go ahead and put in a down pose here and here. Is that the right frames? Yeah, there and there for my other down and my other up. And then we'll come back and we'll look at polishing this. So.